Alrighty guys, welcome back to another one. In today's video, we're doing a really cool 20 gauge slug. Sadly, these are discontinued. Lightfield no longer makes hunting ammunition. But yeah, this is 20 gauge. And you'll notice it's in a red hull. These were sent to us by Martin last year. I believe it was Martin. The hull just says Lightfield Hybrid Magnum 20 gauge 3-inch. That's it. There's no listed muzzle velocity, how heavy the slug is, nothing like that. But you can see right here where it ends. I will find a picture of the box and put it up here along with the velocity and payload this is supposed to be. I'm going to say this is a 7/8 ounce slug, but I could be wrong. It could be 1 ounce. Usually Lightfield, they have some pretty wicked, or had some pretty wicked slugs. They had a 3.5 inch 12 gauge slug that was 1 3/8 ounces at 1890 FPS, almost 5,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, and that is the not heaviest, the most powerful shotgun slug ever on the market. And again, sadly, discontinued. Starting with the box here, I did manage to find a picture of it. There's the same red shell. And you can see the slug, the Sabot, and the tail wad combo. The box itself is a sort of a grayish brown weird color. The box could look better, but you know, who really cares about what the box looks like? We're here for the shell. Hybrid EXP shotgun ammunition is designed for maximum expansion on game. The Magnum lead slug and attached Sabot travel to the target together. I believe that Lightfield called that the impact discarding Sabot. Anyway, the Sabot provides stability for the slug, or, you know, projectile, enhancing accuracy, and yeah, that's what Sabots do. And then it goes on to explain that slugs, they expand on impact, creating a devastating effect. Yeah, I've seen claim these Lightfield slugs are pretty devastating, and these are designed specifically for rifled barrels. Product information here, by the way, this is from Midway. Obviously 20 gauge, best used for big game, deer, maybe even an elk or a moose. This is a quite powerful slug, as you guys will see in just a moment. Quantity, 5 rounds, non-toxic, nope, these are lead. Shell length, 3 inch. And again, this is a Sabot slug. Continuing on, 1700 FPS is the advertised velocity. Primer type is a boxer, non-corrosive, reloadable, yes, it's a shot hull. Barrel type, rifled bore. That's telling you should use a rifled barrel with these. Roll crimp, and the slug weight is 7/8 of an ounce. Now, I'm willing to bet that 7/8 ounce right there, they are adding the weight of the Sabot itself. 7/8 of an ounce is 385 grains, or right close to it. Again, advertised velocity 1700 FPS, giving you a total foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, 2,470. This is more powerful than some 12 gauge slugs that are on the market. It's more powerful than Federal and Remington 16 gauge slugs. This has some good energy for a 20 gauge. Okay, so yeah, this is a pretty potent slug. It's a lot more powerful than some 12 gauge slugs that are on the market. But also, obviously, 12 gauge can have far greater muzzle energy and payload than this. But this is up there for a 20 gauge slug, no doubt. But as you can see, these are done with a roll crimp, and they are kind of old. How old, I'm not sure, but you can see the lead in there is oxidized. You can see the Sabot, it's white, just like the picture I found. Now, I'm not sure when these got changed over to yellow hulls, or they could have started as yellow and moved over to red. I'm not sure, I can't find that info anywhere, but this being a red 20 gauge shell, that's kind of rare. Back before, I believe it was the 1970s, could have been 71, 72, or even the 60s, I can't remember exactly, but the industry got together and decided that 20 gauge hulls in America should be universally yellow to distinguish them from 12 gauge, to prevent that whole thing about dropping a 20 gauge shell in a 12 gauge chamber and then a 12 gauge shell behind that and blowing up your gun. That's true to some degree. With modern guns, that's probably not going to happen, but with older ones, yeah, certainly it can. I've actually seen people put that to the test with new guns, and it just launches the 20 gauge whole shell out the muzzle like a giant slug. But that's not to say that, you know, the gun exploding can't happen. It can. Anyway, this being a red 20 gauge shell, it's just really cool, and I actually prefer them to be any color but yellow. I've got green 20 gauge shells, I have clear, I have a couple blue ones, I have red. I just like any color but yellow. And it's not even that I don't like yellow as a color, it's just because I feel like people should know that they have 20 gauge. Don't put that in a 12. You don't have to make them yellow just out of fear, I guess. I don't know. All I'm saying is you can drop a 16 gauge shell in a 10 gauge. The same way you can drop a 12 or a 20 in a 12. Same situation there. A 28 gauge in a 20 gauge. 24 in a 16. You see what I mean? Like, there are multiple situations where that can occur. The same, you know, dropping a 20 in a 12. That can happen with other gauges too. So why make the 20 gauge the only one that has a fixed color being yellow? Anyways, yeah, this is a Sabot hull, 3-inch, obviously. Head stamp does say 20 with stars. It has a Sabot CX2000 primer. The hull ain't nothing special at all. It's just red, which you rarely ever see in 20 gauge. So I guess without further ado, let's crack this open and see how they put it together. By the way, I didn't mention this, but that is a steel head on it, brass plated. Now, let's open one of these up. I have two. Okay, so starting with the powder, this one has 32.2 in it. I don't know why it just changed. It's been 32.2 for like 30 seconds, but ignore that. It is a large black flake top powder that looks like this stuff back here. And I believe it's the same powder that we saw in the Lightfield 3.5-inch 12 gauge IDS Commander Slug impact discarding Sabot. Yeah, I believe it's the same powder, and I believe it is this one right here. Moving on to the hull, this is once again just a 3-inch Sabot 20 gauge hull, nothing special. It has a low, flat base wad. You can see it's right flush with the primer. That is a low, flat plastic base wad. And if you haven't noticed, it's red. Really nothing else to say here. That is a CX2000 primer, but moving on. This is the tail wad that the Slug is attached to, and it does have a pretty interesting sabot. You guys will see that in just a moment, but this is a nice tight fit in the hull. Plenty of gas seal. And it does have a built-in crush or cushion section. And the reason why that's there, as most of you probably know, is to reduce, you know, pressure spikes upon firing. That gives it some cushion. Imagine that, it having a cushion section, giving it cushion. And it does have a, well, I'm going to call it a stem with a hollow cavity in it that goes up inside the Slug. And it's a pretty tight fit. I don't see this ever falling off. This is, to me, a good recipe for a very, very accurate Slug, having a very a very tight-fitting Slug on a tail wad that's not going to fall off. We've seen time and time again that loose-fitting tail wads, they fall off, and past like 80 yards, they really lose accuracy. Like, they'll go from hitting an inch or two apart from each other. The Slugs at 40 yards, 42, and at 100, they'll hit, you know, 8 inches, 9, even a foot apart from each other, because they fall off the tail wad and kind of destabilize and lose accuracy quick. And that leaves the question, how much does this weigh? 31.8 grains, very close to the powder charge, actually. In ounces, that would be 0.072. Alright, so moving on from that, we'll leave the scale on. Here is the sabot, and this is very interesting. It's actually a hinged design. It's closed on one side, and it is hinged on one side and open on the other. Obviously, I just separated it and pulled the Slug out. I'm pretty sure that both sides are supposed to be connected, but that's not how I pulled it out of the hull. When I pulled it out, one side was already separated. I'm sure that is done on purpose because when the Slug leaves the muzzle, you kind of want the sabot to fall away. This is just for rifling engagement. That way You know, it has proper spin stabilization and accuracy. I'm pretty sure this is meant to fall away, so I'm going to say that one side being open is intentional. But it feels like PVC to me. It also kind of appears to be somewhat dry rotted. I feel like if I bend this, it'll kind of crumble. I hope that ain't the case, but I don't know. We don't ever plan on shooting these. These are discontinued, and being a red 20 gauge shell, a very, very rare factory non-yellow 20 gauge shell, I kind of just want to put these in the ammo collection. But how much does that weigh? 0.064. Together they weigh about 1/8 of an ounce. So moving on to the Slug. Really neat design here. It kind of looks like a little warhead. It's obviously hollow for the tail wad. Again, very, very tight fit on there. It does have a hollow point, and this is pure soft lead. As you can see, it's quite oxidized, and yes, I did mangle it a little bit with needle nose pliers, pulling it out of the shell. Again, it was a very, very tight fit. How much does this weigh together? 7/8 of an ounce. Pretty much spot on. There you go. Now you can see 0.88. That's right spot on, 7/8 of an ounce. How much does the Slug weigh by itself? 3/4 of an ounce. So that's how they're getting that ridiculous speed. It's actually a 3/4 ounce slug, moving 1700 FPS, but with the Sabot and tail wad attached, it's 7/8 ounces. So you guys know me. If you've watched these videos before, I'm not a fan of claiming a heavier payload, or in this case a slug, if part of the payload weight is the wad or buffer, Sabot, whatever it may be, adding to the weight. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. This is actually a 3/4 ounce slug moving 1700. If I were making these for the commercial market, I would list this as a 3/4 ounce slug at 1700, not a 7/8 ounce slug, because the slug itself is only 3/4 of an ounce. So I'm guessing the Sabot falls away upon leaving the muzzle. What does that leave us with for a payload weight? 0.82. So that's close to 7/8 of an ounce. Not quite though, although some people would call that 7/8. Not me. Obviously the tail wad is going to stay with the slug no matter what, and the combined weight is again 0.82. So on target, that would be more muzzle energy because of the weight of the tail wad with the slug. They're both hitting together, attached. You know what I mean? If the Sabot does indeed stay together with the rest of the components here, then you could say it's 7/8 ounces all at once on target. I think this is actually a 58 caliber slug. I will measure that in 1 second, but let's get the Sabot back on it if I can. It's a little bit over the plastic. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, here's what the slug looks like with the Sabot on it. This is the open end. It does fit very nicely all the way around. This is the closed end with the hinge. Top view, bottom view, and that is full bore 20 gauge, or at least I'm assuming. This should be right at 6.2, 5/8. But let's get this back on the tail wad. Again, very tight fit, so this might be hard to do with one hand. Oh, I got it. Not all the way, but yeah, there's what it looks like all together. Now let's actually measure the diameter of the slug, and I guess the Sabot too. Well, my batteries are failing me, but the slug is 0.524. This is actually a 32 gauge slug diameter. Bore diameter on 32 gauge is 0.526. That's very, very close to it, making this actually, technically, a 32 gauge slug. The diameter of the Sabot, and yes, I do have this squeezed together a little bit tight to keep the Sabot closed, is 0.63. That's a slightly bit bigger than 5/8 of an inch, which is actually a little bit over bore for nominal 20 gauge bore diameter, which is 0.615 or 0.612 in some cases, but yeah, basically that's full bore. And here's 32 gauge hull. Yes, it's cut up. I broke the hull back down. Anyway, that doesn't matter. You can see the slug is a perfect fit for 32 gauge. I don't want to push it in all the way because then I'd have to cut the hull down even further to get it back out. But it is a good fit. You know what? Just shove it down. So yeah, it's a 32 gauge slug. If you've never seen 32 gauge, yes, it is a thing. It's mostly a European, South American gauge, but here in America, you can still get guns made in this gauge, but they are quite rare. They used to be standard production along with 24 gauge back before World War II. Ivor Johnson still made single shot 24 gauges until about 1948. And other companies still produced them for a little while up until the 60s, but after that, no standard production 24 or 32 gauge shotguns for the United States until the late 1990s, whenever American Arms imported over under double barrels in 24 and 32 gauge for the American market, and those didn't last all that long, just 2 or 3 years, I think. And whenever apparently you bought those, they came with an entire flat of ammo for either gauge, which was pretty cool. Sadly, I was like 4 or 5 years old back then, or I would have gotten both gauges, but still. Those guns are even rare in the States now. I have two 32 gauge shotguns. One is a Stevens smoothbore and an H&R with a rifled barrel, and I have an Ivor Johnson Champion in 24 gauge. They're all single shots. So I'm going to try to pull this out without damaging the slug or the hull even more. But anyway, let's slap this back together and see if I can make it look presentable. Alright, here it is put back together. Everything re-rolled just fine. I did open that up with needle nose pliers, in case you guys were wondering. And this was an unscabed hull, so it went back together beautifully. Maybe you can hear my son back there, but anyway, I guess that's going to end this video here. That's a beautiful roll. But yeah, I have two of these, and they are going in the ammo collection. But thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.